Hello and welcome to the latest Safer West Mercia podcast. My name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. I'll let my guests introduce themselves.
I'm Pete Martin. I'm from the Redditch Self Defence Association.
So, Pete, obviously this session we are talking about something close to your heart, talking about knife crime and talking about some elements of violence that are within our society associated primarily with knives, but also talking about the role of things like why community advocacy through community activists such as yourself are really important in how we work as a society to tackle the issue. And the central part of that is around education and ensuring that people understand the choices that they make. Here in West Mercia, a really safe place to live. I regularly talk about that, as do others, but it doesn't mean that we're not seeing things like knife crime. Doesn't mean to say that we're seeing violence. It is just at a different area, a different level than we might see maybe in some of our big metropolitan areas, the West Mids, the metropolitan areas of London or Leeds or Manchester. But we've still got it, and the other trend is we're seeing it rise. We're seeing a small uplift. And so, obviously, as Commissioner, I work closely with West Mercia Police to ensure that they do their bit in terms of proactive and indeed a holistic approach to ensure that we are preventing and indeed tackling it when it does happen. But I know a little bit about your work and I know a little bit about knife crime in West Mercia, but hopefully in this session we can talk about that bit and indeed get the listeners to understand a little more that is going on. You've been working in this area for a long time in one form or another. Be really interested to hear for our listeners as to how you got started, as it were, and what that motivation to be involved in the tricky subject, because it is a tricky subject, isn't it?
It is.
In our society.
And it's a subject not a lot of people are comfortable discussing. So I started in the martial arts world in 1979, and I just did traditional martial arts. I did that for a few years when I was at school, and then when I left school I continued to do that. I met a guy who was a prolific martial artist, and I started to get into competition-based martial arts. I travelled all around the country, represented Great Britain for a very small period of time in competition fighting. I wasn't really happy with the competition side. I was never really that competitive. And then in the 80s, I met a local chap called Brian Eustace. Now, Brian Eustace was a serving police officer. And way back in 1973, Brian actually wrote Police Self Defence Handbook as was then. It's obviously been well superseded now. But he was really regarded as a little bit of an expert in self-defence and self-protection. So I did a little bit of training with Brian, and I soon realised that's where my interest was. So I sort of left the competitive field of martial arts and then started to concentrate on learning about self-defence aspect, alongside my day job as an engineer. So it's been quite a long career, really.
How does because I'm not a martial artist, you'll be pleased to, or pleased or not to know, so maybe my position of ignorance, but others might have the same in terms of it is, could be perceived from outside as being acts of violence. Now, my other perception is that it's incredibly disciplined.
Yeah.
You look at people practicing martial arts, and it's a palpable discipline in what they're doing. And I'm just really interested in how these things fit together, because it's not violence for violence sake, because it is violence in a controlled and indeed disciplined process.
Great question. So the CPS itself actually says not only is it legal to use force in self-defence, it's good sense. But people really have to understand the difference between what is legal self-defence and what is violence. So a lot of the education that I do explains to people what that is. The other really interesting thing that I learned from a very sort of early time in my career is within self-defence you've got two main tactics. You've got what's called the hard skills, the physical self-defence, what we're talking about at the moment. But then you've got the soft skills, which is the education side. So that's what we know as the awareness, the avoidance skills, the educational skills. And what I've discovered over years and years is it's that educational side and that awareness that is really pivotal in keeping you safe. So a lot of what I do now has moved away from the physical side of self-defence, although we still do it where it's appropriate and people want it. But the vast majority of work I do now is on the soft skills and the personal safety side of things.
The adage or the misconception of actually it's about getting the first bunch into etc. And from what I've seen, especially around self-defence being demonstrated, it's a lot of it around behaviours of the individual and choices that the individual will make in terms of the way that they can assert themselves if needed, but the discipline to know how to do that. And I think that really links to some of the work that you've been doing around the education. We've seen a real rise, as I've said, in recent times, but we've also seen a much bigger rise over the last decade or so around the proliferation of the knife.
Yeah.
And a thing that we've all got in our own homes, haven't we? I could go home and I've got quite an impressive collection that I'm quite proud of.
Yeah. Every kitchen drawer's got a knife.
Indeed. So it's not a specialist thing that has to be imported, but it's becoming more common in a setting that it's not designed for, on the street, as it were. And I'm interested in how that bit links around the choice element of predominantly young people and often predominantly young men. Around that link between the discipline of community self-defence and the background in the martial arts, and then the choices young people might or might not take in terms of feeling safe, being safe, and violence.
Great question, because what I think what I do is fairly unique. Well, I know it is in our area, because what I do in my school presentations, I create scenarios based on self-defence situations, and then that is a good visual representation how you can't rely on physical self-defence, and I sort of re-engineer stuff to show how it may fail you. And what you said on figures is really, really important, because of all the policing forces in Britain, we are amongst the lowest when it comes to knife crime figures. And I do look at the figures constantly. And what I am pleased around to a point is, during the pandemic, we had a big drop in knife crime, as you know, across the UK. And what I really feared was we was going to see a big upsurge in knife crime in a short period of time. And thankfully, that hasn't really happened. So I appreciate what you're saying. And there has been a rise in knife crime, but it hasn't been as big a rise as I feared. So that's another positive to take away from it. So in the presentations we show how you can't really rely on physical self-defence, which is a bit of a myth. So what we do, we teach them other things they can do, and if they are feeling scared, other strategies they can adopt other than carrying a knife, which is one of the major causes young people are carrying knives in our area, is not because they're drug dealers, although it does happen, not because they're going out robbing people in the streets, but it does happen. It's because of fear. And it's that
feeling of unsafe, and what to do about it.
And that fear now has become the backbone of my education and what I try to get across to the young people. And believing that carrying a knife will make you safer is false. And in fact, it's one of the worst things you can do to ensure your personal safety. You're actually putting yourself in more harm when you're actually trying to make yourself safer.
Because that's what the stats show, doesn't it? Those involved in injuries associated with sharp objects. It is also the connection between those that are carrying. And that's, I always think, really interesting. In the bits you just talked about, Pete, in terms of your education element, one of the bits that I've focused on to some extent as Commissioner over my time, and indeed committed to do more, is around how that role model element in people's lives. And,
Yeah.
and you and I are of a certain age, maybe don't understand youth culture in terms of the influences they take. But
Yeah.
I think it's no different to when we were kids and the kids that are there now around the role models are so important. They might be coming in a different way, whether it comes through the internet now, whereas it perhaps didn't in our day.
Yeah.
How do you think we as a society need to use those role models to help get the right messages into the ears of our young people in West Mercia?
Okay. Well, the way we engage with young people, and I mean now my referral system now is really growing. Last year we sort of processed well over 100 young people on a one-to-one basis, and these were people referred from local policing teams, schools and colleges. The way we break down the mentoring side is we get them involved with activities they enjoy, such as sport, and then you build up a relationship, a rapport through that activity. Yeah. So it's less cold. You know, we deal with...
not just some middle-aged chap telling them what they should be doing.
Like us. But it's true, you know. Some of these young people, they have social workers doing that. They might have a police officer sitting in front of them, telling about the consequences. And this is just a different approach, really. It does need different approaches, and this is just one that we use.
If you had your magic wand, as it were, is there something on that we could do? Is it, if you were Home Secretary for the day or Prime Minister for the day, is there something in this area that you think actually this is the thing that would have quite quick benefit?
That's the golden question. As human beings, we very much want simple answers to complicated questions. Yes. So
we often do as politicians, because then we want to stick it in a strap line on an election.
There you go, it looks good. So we'll do it, we're all human beings. So when I'm out about on my travels getting people's opinions, especially with adults, I tend to hear the same things. And people tend to have an opinion on it, but it tends to be one opinion. So it could be the schools need to take more responsibility and have more education about knife crime. The police need to do more to reduce knife crime. We need more officers. We need more positive activities provided by the councils. Parents need to take a bigger role. And I know this is a bit of an open answer, but it's the truth. Because it's a societal issue, society has a role to play, and every single one of us has a role to play in that reduction and control of knife crime. And there's things that every one of us can do as an individual to help with the fight against knife crime. So I wouldn't like to just pinpoint it onto one thing.
With violence in our society, full stop, whether it be maybe the people who might carry a knife, through to violence behind closed doors in the privacy of a relationship, domestic violence. Yeah. It's those things. It's how we as a society help move ourselves forward, and that's one of the things I've been interested in. I know I provide a very small grant that supports some of your work, as it were, and I was just interested in how we use activity like yours to help shift that conversation forward in society, because whilst a politician myself, I do recognise there's not a pill, is there? There's not a magic solution that can just be unboxed and there you go. And I, like you, engage with lots of young people, and we're all different, and we're all. And I think in 2022 we're much prouder at celebrating those differences. But I think it makes the challenge harder as to how to give you the right support so that you maybe follow a safer route and give you the right support, because that one-to-one element is ever more important in 2022.
Yeah, the one-to-one aspect of the work we do is something we very much want to increase, and that's where I say the real work is done. The big assemblies and the awareness is great, we get engagement and we get the educational message, but where we've actually changed lives is the one-to-one support. We've got young people, homeless young people homed, we've got them into work, we've got them back into education, we've got them to put knives down. Some of them have gone on to qualify and are now coaching for us. So
that's a nice story, isn't it?
Oh,
that's a nice bit of payback.
we don't do competitive stuff. If anyone wants to, from what they learn with us, if they want to compete, we'll send them to an ABA boxing club or something like that. But when we have a success like that, nobody sees about it. Nobody sees it in the paper because it's not a gold medal. But when I go home, that's my gold medal.
I'm a big fan of the in several different bits that I commission. Often, when you've done it for a little bit of while, and then you start to see some of the service users come back.
Yeah.
It really exciting. Bright Star being some boxing academy that I support in the more northern part of the Force area.
I know.
Really great to see some of their service users come back.
Yeah.
And hearing the motivation as to why.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Really, really powerful.
I have some of our users now bringing their children to me.
Goodness. That's a sign you're getting old as well.
I don't know whether I should celebrate that, but it is fantastic to see. And we provide other services as well, not just to young people. We provide victim support as well now to people who've suffered violent crime, and that started off with just for young people, but now we look after victims of domestic abuse as well, which you've just touched on. So I'm a level 4 counsellor now, finished off my qualification during COVID, so some positive came out of it. I had a chance to finish off my studying. So we provide aftermath support as well as not just preventative stuff. So what we do as an association now has really grown and become much more diverse, and that's really in line with what we were saying, when you need different approaches to help reduce this problem. And we've had to adapt and we've had to try different strategies and different ways of engaging.
If COVID's taught us one, first of all, when we get some time suddenly of not rushing around, we don't always know what to do with it, but it's great to hear that you put it to that good use. And I always think as well, COVID's challenged us around the things that we can and can't do.
That's right.
And making us thinking differently. If listeners that were listening to the podcast wanted to know more about your service, obviously I know how to get in touch with you. But how do you want to say to the listeners how they can find out more about the service you offer and your activity, and indeed how somebody either might want to get involved or,
yes, of course,
or refer somebody in?
So the easiest way is to go on the internet and just put in redditchselfdefence.co.uk. You'll find us. We'll be sort of the top of the search list. Or if anybody's on social media, we're on Redditch Self Defence on Facebook, and a lot of our services are advertised and promoted on there. So we're easy to find.
Excellent. One of the questions I often like to ask, and I said it earlier about the Prime Minister or the Home Sec, but if you were Commissioner for a day, what would be the thing you'd pick? What would be the thing you'd focus on?
So I'm not an expert on policing. But your job is all about policing, so what I say has got to be around policing. So, I've got a bit of a gare on this. So, rather than try and do everything in a day, because what you do is too diverse, and I don't know enough about the other stuff you do. So what I'm going to say is, I would continue to do the work you're doing on increasing police force figures.
Officer numbers.
Because that would impact on all areas of policing, of which some I know little about. So that's a bit of a get out, it's important.
Because I think you touched on it earlier around referrals from your local police, your engagement from your local police. Well, that can only happen if those police are embedded in their community and know and understand those that might need referring and others, can't they? That community activism from the police as well.
Can I just say, because I know we're going to finish a meeting soon, the support that I've had off our local policing team, the SNC, the Safer Neighbourhood team, has been exceptional. I never realised what a valuable job PCSOs did until I started working with them. Now, I was a victim of knife crime 11 years ago. That's why I started to specialise in knife crime. And I suffered with PTSD for some years. And believe it or not, and people are a bit surprised by this, and this isn't just saying it because you're here, one of the biggest forms of support I got was from my local policing team and the victim liaison officer, who I still know now. So I think it's important that people recognise the work that those local policing teams do, because they know your area.
And that's one of my missions, is around to ensure to set them up to succeed. And one of the benefits of the officer numbers coming back up is those local officers embedded in the community can do more of their community work, not having to be dragged off doing the other urgent part of policing.
Yeah.
And it's really great to hear about that relationship, and also the role that the PCSOs as well as the PCs will play in that team, because there's some absolutely amazing officers and PCSOs out there embedded in our community doing a fantastic job. My mission as commissioner is to set them up to succeed, and your element of how we keep our community safe is a key, tooth in that cog in the machine that helps keep us.
It's nice of you to say.
And we are grateful for the activity and the activism, and I use that word on purpose around the subject. I'd like to thank you for joining today. I'd like to thank the listeners for listening to this podcast. Obviously, you've heard from Peter around how you can get in touch and find out a bit more around the service that Redditch Self Defence offers, and indeed some of the other commission services that I also provide are on my website. If you pop West Mercia PCC into your search engine, it will give you the link. They're also available on West Mercia Police's website in terms of if there are issues you want to report to your local police, or indeed how to get in touch with your local policing team. Peter, I'd like to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for your time and listening to me.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the listeners to this Safer West Mercia podcast.